Silence speaks louder. Feel more, become more. They say silence has no sound, but have you ever listened to what it carries? Because if you truly listen, you'll realize silence speaks. It speaks the truth you've been avoiding, the feelings you've been ignoring, and the wisdom your words could never express. We live in a world where everyone is shouting to be heard, but no one is listening to understand. We talk about peace, but rarely feel it. We talk about change, but rarely become it. The truth is, silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means everything is happening inside. That's where real transformation begins. Not in the noise of expression, but in the calm of awareness. When you finally stop talking and allow silence to settle in, you begin to notice things you've never paid attention to before. The soft rhythm of your breath, the quiet pulse of your heart, the way your thoughts drift and settle like waves. That's when you realize silence isn't empty. It's full of everything you've been too distracted to see. It reveals what words often hide. The more you speak, the more you filter. You start choosing what to say, what to hide, how to sound. But silence has no filter. It's raw and honest. It shows you exactly who you are beneath the noise of performance. When you sit in silence, the truth begins to rise. The fears you've buried, the emotions you've ignored, the dreams you've delayed. It can be uncomfortable at first because it strips you down to your essence. But that discomfort is not punishment. It's awakening. We are surrounded by voices all the time, the world telling us who to be, people telling us what to do, our own mind replaying every insecurity. We've become so addicted to sound that we fear quiet moments. But silence is not your enemy. It's your mirror. When you stop talking, you finally hear what your soul has been whispering all along. Maybe it's telling you to rest, maybe to let go, maybe to start again. You just couldn't hear it because you were too busy explaining your life instead of feeling it. Silence doesn't rush, it waits. It allows you to face the emotions you keep pushing aside and understand them instead of running from them. In silence, your awareness expands. You begin to notice how your body reacts to your thoughts, how your energy changes around certain people, how your intuition gently guides you even when logic disagrees. The world becomes sharper, more vivid, more real. You start to see how much of your life was lived on autopilot, repeating the same patterns, chasing the same distractions. And in that realization lies freedom, the freedom to pause, to choose, to realign. You don't need to speak to understand life. You need to be still enough to feel it. So when you stop talking, you aren't losing communication. You're finding connection. You connect to yourself, to the present moment, to everything that's real and alive inside you. Silence becomes the teacher that words could never be. It reminds you that truth doesn't always need to be said. Sometimes it just needs to be felt. And when you begin to live from that space where awareness replaces noise, you don't just hear silence anymore. You become it. Calm, grounded, and profoundly awake. When you let silence take over, something beautiful begins to awaken inside you. The ability to feel. Most people spend their lives describing emotions rather than experiencing them. They say, "I'm fine," when they're not, or talk endlessly about what they think, but never pause to understand what they feel. But silence breaks that pattern. When you allow yourself to sit quietly, without the urge to speak, you start to feel in ways you never have before. The mind softens, the walls fall, and suddenly the emotions you've suppressed begin to surface. At first, it might be uncomfortable. You might feel sadness, fear, or emptiness. But all of it is real, and real is what heals. Because silence opens the door to the language of the soul, and that language, feeling. The mind speaks through logic, but the heart speaks through emotion. Every time you stop talking, you make room for your heart to express itself. Feelings are not a weakness. They are your compass. They tell you when something is right, when something is wrong, when something is missing. They guide you toward truth far better than reason ever could. But when life gets noisy, we lose touch with that inner compass. We drown in the voices of others, in distractions, in endless thoughts. That's why silence is sacred. It clears away the clutter so you can finally hear the whisper of your heart, the quiet knowing that's been trying to guide you all along. To feel is to connect, not just with yourself, but with life itself. When you truly feel, you stop existing on the surface. You start noticing the beauty in small things, the stillness of morning, the warmth of sunlight, the peace in your breath. You become more compassionate toward others because you understand pain, love, and vulnerability on a deeper level. You begin to see that emotions aren't obstacles, they're messages. Sadness tells you what you miss. Joy tells you what you love. Anger tells you where you've been hurt. Every feeling, when honored, brings you closer to who you are meant to become. So instead of running from your feelings, allow them. Let silence be the bridge between your thoughts and your heart. Sit with your emotions, even the heavy ones. Feel them fully without labeling them as good or bad. Because in that stillness, you realize something powerful. That feeling deeply is not a sign of fragility, but of strength. The more you feel, the more alive you become. Silence doesn't make you empty, it makes you whole. It teaches you to stop explaining life and start experiencing it, one honest feeling at a time. Silence gives you something the world can't: clarity. In a noisy life filled with endless opinions, notifications, and conversations, we lose the ability to hear our own truth. We keep talking, explaining, and justifying ourselves until we forget what we actually believe. But when you turn down the volume of the world, you start to hear the quiet voice within, the one that's been there all along, patiently waiting to be heard. In silence, confusion begins to clear. You start to see what really matters and what doesn't. You realize that most of your anxiety comes not from reality, but from noise, from trying to meet everyone's expectations except your own. Silence helps you separate what's real from what's imagined. It helps you see that peace was never outside. It was buried under the chaos of constant sound. When you stop talking, your mind stops racing to fill every gap. Instead, you begin to observe. You start noticing your thoughts, how they rise and fall, how some serve you and others drain you. And in that observation comes power. You learn that not every thought deserves your attention. Not every opinion needs your response. Silence trains you to pause before reacting, to understand before speaking. It gives you emotional control, not because you suppress your feelings, but because you finally understand them. Clarity is not about knowing everything. It's about knowing what truly matters to your soul. And silence, more than anything else, gives you that gift. As you spend more time in silence, decisions become easier. You begin to trust your intuition, that quiet knowing that doesn't argue, it simply knows. You stop seeking validation and start relying on your inner guidance. The noise of the world loses its grip on you because you found something stronger, the sound of your own awareness. And that awareness makes you steady. It doesn't matter what others say or how loud life becomes. Your peace remains untouched because it's anchored in clarity. In the end, silence becomes more than the absence of words. It becomes the space where your mind resets, your emotions balance, and your vision sharpens. It's where you remember that wisdom doesn't come from talking more, but from listening deeper. And when you learn to listen to the quiet, really listen, you realize that everything you were chasing outside was already waiting for you within. That's the power of silence. It clears the fog, centers your spirit, and shows you who you truly are without the noise of the world defining you. Silence is not just the absence of words, it's the birthplace of transformation. Once you stop talking, start feeling, and gain clarity, silence begins to do something extraordinary. It reshapes who you are. It changes your energy, your perception, and your connection to life itself. In silence, your awareness deepens. You no longer react impulsively. You respond with purpose. You no longer chase validation. You move with conviction. You begin to understand that growth doesn't come from constantly doing, but from being. The more still you become, the more powerful you feel inside, because silence aligns you with your authentic self, the version of you that isn't performing for approval or pretending to be fine. It's the version that simply is, pure and grounded. In those quiet spaces, you start to feel a profound connection with the world around you. The more silent you become, the more you notice life, the way the wind carries peace, the way light falls softly through the morning sky, the way your heart calms when you breathe consciously. Silence awakens your sensitivity, not as a weakness, but as strength. It makes you emotionally intelligent, spiritually aware, and mentally balanced. You stop trying to dominate life and begin to coexist with it. That's where real evolution begins, when you're not at war with the world or with yourself, but in harmony with both. Transformation through silence isn't loud or sudden, it's slow, graceful, and lasting. You might not even realize it's happening. One day you'll wake up and notice that things which once made you anxious no longer hold power over you. People's opinions won't shake you. You'll handle pain with calmness and joy with gratitude. You'll find that you've evolved not by changing your surroundings, but by changing your awareness. Silence gave you that. The ability to see without judgment, to love without attachment, and to live without fear. Eventually you'll understand that silence was never a void. It was a mirror, a guide, a healer. It led you back to yourself. You'll begin to appreciate moments of stillness the way others chase noise, because you know that every pause is a chance to grow. You become a quieter, wiser, deeper version of yourself, not because you learned more words, but because you learned more truth. Silence speaks louder than anything else, and when you truly learn to listen, you don't just hear, you become. Silence is the ultimate language of strength. It doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't beg to be understood. It simply exists, calm and unshakable. The final stage of this journey is where you no longer see silence as emptiness, but as power. When you embrace silence deeply, you start to realize that your energy speaks louder than your voice ever could. You walk into a room and your presence says everything. You begin to radiate calm confidence, not because you have all the answers, but because you're no longer trying to prove anything. Silence gives you that quiet authority, that magnetic peace that draws people in without effort. This kind of power doesn't come from dominance or control. It comes from alignment. You've stopped talking. You've learned to feel. You've found clarity, and you've evolved through awareness. Now you simply are. You no longer need to justify yourself, argue your worth, or chase validation. Your silence becomes your strength because it's rooted in self-understanding. When you speak, your words carry weight. When you act, your actions hold purpose. You've moved from reacting to responding, from confusion to clarity, from noise to presence. That's not weakness. That's mastery. The world teaches you to be loud, to shout your success, to defend your pain, to constantly prove your identity. But silence teaches you something far greater, that real power doesn't need an audience. The calmest minds build the strongest foundations. The quietest souls carry the deepest wisdom. In silence, you become untouchable because you no longer seek anything outside yourself. You find fulfillment not in noise, but in stillness, not in attention, but in awareness. And when you reach that level of peace, you begin to move through life differently. You listen more, observe more, feel more. You stop trying to be understood and start understanding. You stop reacting to chaos and start radiating calm. You become the embodiment of strength, the kind that doesn't shout, but shines. And in that sacred space of silence, you realize that evolution isn't about becoming louder or stronger in the world's eyes. It's about becoming quieter, deeper, and truer in your own. That's when silence stops being a choice and becomes your way of being, the sound of a soul fully awake. Silence is the bridge between who you were and who you're becoming. It's that sacred in-between, the pause between your past noise and your future peace. When you learn to honor silence, you begin to operate on a different frequency, one that's no longer reactive, but deeply intentional. You stop being pulled by chaos and start being guided by calm. You begin to understand that growth doesn't always look like movement. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Silence teaches you to trust divine timing, to have faith in your journey, and to know that not everything requires a response. The more you embrace silence, the more your energy begins to speak for you. It becomes your identity, grounded, wise, and deeply present. Silence also refines your perception of life. You begin to notice how every situation carries a lesson, how every delay hides protection, and how every pain plants a seed of purpose. You stop rushing your evolution and start feeling it. Silence gives you the patience to let transformation unfold naturally. It allows you to observe the shifts happening within you, the emotional balance, the mental peace, the spiritual maturity. You no longer see silence as a void, but as a teacher, one that speaks without words, heals without touch, and leads without force. It teaches you that your greatest power lies not in what you say, but in what you understand. When you evolve through silence, life stops feeling like a competition and starts feeling like a conversation between you and the universe. You realize that peace isn't something to find, it's something to remember. It was always within you, waiting beneath the layers of noise, fear, and distraction. You become more authentic, more aware, and more compassionate because silence purifies your energy. It removes the need to prove, to please, or to perform. You simply exist fully, freely, and fearlessly. In the end, silence doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you've always been. It strips away the unnecessary and amplifies the essential. It gives you back to yourself. And when you reach that space, you no longer seek power, peace, or validation because you are those things. Silence has transformed you from within. You've stopped talking, started feeling, gained clarity, evolved through awareness, and now you've become the calm in the storm, the voice that doesn't need to be heard to be understood. That's when silence stops being a practice and becomes your true state of being. In a world that glorifies noise, silence becomes an act of strength. When you stop talking and start feeling, you begin to understand that the loudest transformations often happen in the quietest moments. Silence is not emptiness, it's awareness. It teaches you to listen to your own heart instead of the chaos around you. The more you slow down and breathe, the more you realize that true evolution doesn't come from doing more, but from being more. In the quiet, you finally meet yourself. Not the version you show the world, but the version that's raw, real, and whole. As you embrace silence, you learn to feel without fear. You stop labeling emotions as good or bad and start seeing them as guides. Every moment of stillness becomes an invitation to grow, to release what no longer serves you, and to reconnect with what truly matters. You begin to value depth over display, connection over conversation. The silence becomes your safe space where truth replaces noise and presence replaces performance. You no longer need to speak to be understood because your energy begins to communicate far louder than your words ever could. Silence also gives you something that endless talking never will: clarity. It clears your mental clutter, grounds your emotions, and sharpens your vision. You begin to notice patterns that once blinded you, and you start responding to life with intention rather than impulse. You find peace not in isolation, but in awareness. You realize that silence isn't about withdrawing from the world. It's about returning to yourself. It's in that return that true transformation begins, calm, steady, and powerful. In the end, silence becomes your evolution. It no longer feels like something you do. It becomes who you are. The quieter you become, the deeper you feel, and the more you grow. Your silence becomes your strength. Your peace becomes your power, and your stillness becomes your statement. When you start living from that inner silence, you don't need to speak to make an impact. Your presence itself becomes a message. And that's when you truly evolve, not by being louder, but by becoming truer. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you for taking the time to listen, reflect, and grow with me today. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to sit in silence after this video. Not to think, not to plan, but just to feel. Because sometimes the quietest moments are the ones that speak the loudest truths. Remember, silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. Until next time, stay grounded, stay aware, and keep evolving. This is Heart Talk Studio, signing off. Thank you for listening, thank you for feeling, and thank you for being here. See you in the next video. Stay silent, stay strong.